Well, the Pennsylvania Department of Education has introduced a plan that will shut down what it considers to be failing charter schools. The biggest issue of the proposal is the changes made in the funding. The Department of Education believes it is overpaying for cyber charter schools in Pennsylvania, but the Pennsylvania Coalition of Public Charter Schools says that's not true. Lenny McAllister is director for the Western Pennsylvania for Commonwealth Foundation. Jones is right now. So let's just talk about this, Lenny. It's always the back and forth. Last week we were talking about New York State, where they didn't want to authorize more charters in the city of New York, and the whole back and forth. And now you have in Pennsylvania. So what's their deal now, saying, oh, we're paying too much? What's the deal in Pennsylvania?
Well, what's going on, Roland, is, and I've been dealing with this since I've come on board as CEO of the Pennsylvania Coalition of Public Charter Schools, is you constantly have this fight over funding. And although have basically 25% of all the funding coming from the state staying at the school district and not following the kid from the school district over to the charter school, and despite the fact that school districts such as Philadelphia have been getting millions upon millions of dollars since last spring to fund schools that have not been open, where the charter schools and the cyber charter schools have been opened by and large since last spring, and the brick and mortar charters have been open in a hybrid fashion, and the cyber charter schools have been open the whole time. You still see this fight between teachers unions and charter schools, and schools that are more run by African Americans in the charter sector having to fight against the education establishment for fair funding to ensure that we can serve our kids in a way that's going to best fit them academically and developmentally.
Okay, so what are the numbers? What are the numbers?
The numbers are right now, what you're looking at is, like I said, on average, 1/4 of every dollar stays at the school district for a charter school. Now, you have school districts such as Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, where it's basically 35% roughly that stays in the school district from state funding, that stays at the school district level versus going and following the kid over to the charter school. So whereas you have some school districts that have literally millions upon millions of dollars in their reserve balances, and you have these charter schools that are on the brink, you end up finding that the school district... Now, what's transpiring with the cyber charters is this. They're saying, well, the cyber charters have these huge reserve funds, much like the school districts. The problem is, Roland, you have 500 school districts in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Each one of those 500 school districts determines the amount of tuition that it costs per student in their public school district. So when it comes to a cyber charter school, which obviously recruits from around the Commonwealth, it might cost $15,000 in one school district, but it might be $17,000 in a second school district, and it might be $22,000 in a third school district. They want to make that one lump sum the lowest possible number for the cyber charters, and yet continue this fuzzy math when it comes to the school districts, even as they, A, continue to have this hybrid model, and some of them are still closed to in-person instruction, and B, the feds are sending in billions of dollars for school education for school districts since March of 2020.
So do you simply see this as an effort by the state to try to just cut funding? Is that what's going on?
This is just another round of that. This is something that's been going on under this governor since January of 2015. He has done this with tax credit scholarships for kids that are going to Catholic and private schools. He has done this in the charter community. He is currently proposing $230 million worth of cuts, including $100 million for special education for kids in brick and mortar and cyber charter schools, including $50 million in special education cuts in Philadelphia alone, where 1/3 of all public school students are charter school students. And as we well know, that's a majority school district, so it's going to disproportionately hurt African-American kids that are already on IEPs or other forms of special education plans. This is just unacceptable, especially during a pandemic where we're all suffering and trying to get back on track.
It never is. It amazes me that we have this constant battle back and forth, Teresa, in these states over this. And I say this all the time. Like, literally, there are 3 million children in America who are in charter schools, making up less than 5% of all students. And you have this attitude that the 5% are causing 95% of the problems. It's just dumb to me. And my position has always been the same, Teresa. That is, and I was in Philadelphia. We had a school choice is the Black Choice town hall there year before last. Folks, y'all can go to our YouTube channel and watch it. But the thing for me is just real simple. What is best for children to educate our kids? Period.
Yeah, and that's been the conversation here in Philadelphia. Listen, I live here, I grew up here, and so the conversations here, it has always been education. I think every elected official that has wanted to run for public office, either, city council or mayor, has always talked about the one point that will get them elected, education. But we never really talk about the state problem. And, McAllister really just laid it out. There is a horrible funding formula that has happened on the state level where the criteria of what a failing charter school is has really been sort of at the focal point of some of these discussions. I know I actually had two clients a few years ago who black-owned charter schools who, literally wanted to educate their children, add culture, add history, add a lot of arts. And, the criteria that some of these charter schools and the explanation of some of them, it just really didn't add up. And so there was a lot of battles. There was a lot of advocacy. And again, at the end of the day, these children were suffering. So every time the school district of Philadelphia, and particularly, because I'm not sure what's going on in Pittsburgh, but in particular the school district of Philadelphia would put a stamp on a failing school, that then child that's in a charter school will go to another school. Hopefully there's one next door, a public school that's next door. But otherwise they would go 15, 20 miles down, and then hopefully they would be in a lottery system to get in. So ultimately this child suffers, and then they're hopefully a part of a lottery system that they'll some of them just don't even get in. So, when we talk about, where are some of our kids are going, that's why, workforce development apprenticeship programs are sometimes at the, at the highest peak. Oh, let's have a job fair. No, let's educate our kids, because we educate our kids. We can then start to tell them, hey, gun violence can reduce. Hey, you do have other options. The hood is not your only option, right? But if they're not in the institution that is giving them the development skills, then they'll feel like the same lyrics that's coming through some of these rap lyrics today will be their only option. And then some of my, my young girls, and I have to say this before I let you go, but some of my young girls who were like 13 or 14 was like, I was like, what do you aspire to do? And they didn't want to say it out loud, but they put it on paper and they said, I want to be a dancer. And I'm like, okay, ballet. And these girls was literally saying stripper. And I'm just like, this is the culture. And it's so unfortunate. It breaks my heart, because when we talk about the next generation of leadership, we have to talk about the next generation of education. And it really starts with making sure that there's adequate funding across the board.
And Teresa's right, Roland. You can't sit there and say that you're going after these charter schools because they're failing academically and then continue to dump more money into the Philadelphia school district with a lot of failing schools, or the Erie School District, or Harrisburg School District, or the Pittsburgh School District. And we see it across the country, where the solution for failing district schools is they need more money. The solution for charter schools that are taking on kids that are already 1 to 3 years behind academically is, well, if they don't catch them up in a couple years, we got to shut them down. And disproportionately, you find more black teachers and more black administrators in charter schools. In Pennsylvania, less than 6% of all teachers in school districts are black. It is a matter of fact, there are some school districts that haven't had a black teacher in almost a decade. In charter schools, that number is 20%, with many schools, including many of the schools that Teresa's talking about in Philadelphia, that are led by black leaders that are trying to uniquely educate our kids and close that gap so that they can be competitive in the workforce for decades to come. We can't allow people to choke off this lane of school choice and think that we're going to bring our communities to where we want them to be.
Xavier?
Well, number one, we have to make sure that charter school is not a hustle for those that start those schools. Number one. Number two, we have to make sure that the education of our children is priority number one. and putting charter schools in competition with public schools when they don't even have the same objectives is ridiculous. And we have to be in the business of educating our kids. We have a technology divide. We have old books and not enough resources for teachers. We should be putting, instead of just dumping money and saying, hey, you solve it, where are the actual problems to make sure we are satisfying not just the minimum standards of educating our kids, but truly making them leaders in the next generation.
No, I agree with that. We should,
but the goals are the same, though. First of all, hold on, Lenny. But the goals are the same. The goal is very simple. This is very simple. Whether you're in a public traditional school, magnet school, charter school, parochial school, online school, private school, the goal is the same, is to educate the children. Now, the question is, who's effective? Who actually gets it done? How do you get it done? The problem is that we have had this attitude, there's only one delivery system in this country. That, to me, is the problem. I go back to the decisions being made in Pennsylvania right now. The question is, are they good for the parent and the student? Not the district, the parent and the student. Lenny, go ahead.
I mean, and that's the whole point there, Roland. I mean, we can't go into this assuming that charter schools are being created to be a hustle, because if you want to see a hustle, go to how the education sector has been unionized for the last 50 to 70 years. And people forget, yes, we still need to fix traditional school districts. But again, it's not called the Catholic school to prison pipeline. It's not called the private school to prison pipeline or the charter school to prison pipeline. That school to prison pipeline was built in the 1980s in traditional public schools, traditionally by unionized workforces that oftentimes did not look like our communities, that brought police forces in there and took cafeteria fights and made them misdemeanors over the course of the 80s and the 90s. The charter school laws that came into effect in the mid to late 90s in places such as Pennsylvania, and I was down in North Carolina with leaders down there and black charter leaders down there just last week, was for the reason of trying to circumvent some of the negative things that were going on in traditional school districts to give more of our community members an opportunity to close the gaps. People forget about charter schools. We're taking on, in some instances, 3 and 4 generations of academic failure by the school districts in those communities and trying to catch those kids up so that the family doesn't repeat the poverty that's been into the school district for quite some time. For example, the public school code in Pennsylvania was written in 1949. Think about where we were as a people in 1949. We were still dealing with segregation in Pennsylvania. Levittown, the legacy of Levittown, was being entrenched in 1949. The 1949 public school code was still written with ink of red line. So when you're talking about taking that on, and one side's trying to triple down on that economically and otherwise, and there's another segment trying to say, let's diversify the education delivery system so that kids and families can win in whatever system works best for them, we have to have self-determination within education and empower the kids and the families. If we don't, we're going to always be behind the curve. And if we can't catch up now, we may never catch up.
How do we best incentivize that? How do we? I want to ask him a quick question. How do we best incentivize? Sorry about that, Roland. How do we best incentivize?
No. Go ahead.
To be able to, how do we incentivize them positively, not just with dollars, but be able to?
Okay, hold on 1 second. Hold on 1 second. You said, how do we best incentivize who? Who's getting incentivized?
Charter schools for beating certain benchmarks and making sure that
easy. You incentivize them the same way you incentivize traditional public schools. You get to stay open. I mean, when you're doing your job, I mean, that's the whole point. See, if you're doing your job on the charter school, let's be real clear. Depending upon what state you're in, if you're a charter school, you have X number of years to hit certain benchmarks, or you get shut down. Right. You've got traditional public schools that ain't hit the benchmarks for 10, 15 years and don't get shut down. So the reality is, in most states, you have a much more rigorous review process of charter schools than you do traditional schools. So to me, the incentive is you get to stay open if you hit your numbers. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm from Chicago, where we had the last mayor got in trouble here because he was shutting down public schools, and it was all over the place in terms of how it impacted him politically. And so a little bit different situation how it is in the state of Illinois, but beyond just staying open, how do we be increasing more dollars to maybe help them, and how do they help?
No. Okay, hold up.
Okay.
See, let's deal with facts. In Chicago, they had 100,000 fewer students in the Chicago public school than the previous decade. Look, I ran the Chicago Defender, and this was the hardest point for people in Chicago to understand. If there's a school that was built to house 1,000 kids, and there are now 250 and 300 kids in that school, the upkeep of a building is the same. You can't say, well, I'm going to upkeep just 1/3 of the building. I got to upkeep the whole building. The problem in Chicago was that you had a mayor and an appointed school board that was not communicating enough. You have a teachers union that was very obstinate in terms of this is what we want. What you didn't have people saying, how do we reimagine education in Chicago for the 21st century and stop trying to educate like it was the 20th century? When I ran the Chicago Defender, I'm telling you, what happened with me and the Defender, to me, applied to the school district there in Chicago. We had a building where we were only using 20% of the building. 20%. The people were like, I said, y'all, this is a dump. The AC wasn't working in the summer, and it was cold as hell in the winter. So I said, we got to go. All these black folks start protesting. No, y'all can't move. Y'all can't move. No, we got to save the building. I said, hey, what do y'all want? Do y'all want to save the building or save the paper? Because the building, it would have cost us $7 million to rehab the building. The whole damn company with 4 newspapers wasn't worth $7 million. So when we have this discussion with education, and look, I grew up in Clinton Park in Houston. Right now, there's this huge empty field where my elementary school used to be. Why? Because folk like me moved. You don't have enough families there with children. So does it make sense economically to have a Clinton Park Elementary School where you're servicing less than 200 students, and then across the freeway you have Pleasantville Elementary School? Does it make sense to move the kids from Clinton Park to Pleasantville? Yes. The battle in Chicago, they don't want to do that. And so you don't have folk who are being real about what's actually happening in education. They still try. Well, when I went to school, well, guess what? That world has gone. It ain't the same.
Yeah, I mean, Roland, I think you make a lot of really strong and valid points. And I think it's extremely important to be able to make sure that those schools that are really doing well, that are charter schools, are getting all the support they need to be able to continue to create more opportunities and to better educate our kids. And I think that's the most important part, and public schools learn from that to be able to adopt better ways to educate our children. So.
And that's what it's supposed to be.
I just want us to just again, we have to rethink education. I was one of the advisors of XQ Schools America, Michael, and they was talking about how we reimagine high school. We've got to do that because it's not the same. There are children born today. I mean, I'm sitting right here, broadcasting from a home studio, okay, with a HD camera, a portable teleprompter, laptop, a LiveView LU800 streaming unit, a ATM Mini Pro, 7 lights here, 3 iPads, 2 iPhones, an Android phone. There are kids today being born into this. This is what their experience is at 1, 2, 3, and 4. It ain't a big chief ass legal, big chief pad with a number 2 damn pencil.
Right. Do we still have Lenny?
I'm here.
Yeah, he's there. Go ahead.
The question I have, well, I wasn't sure. But the question I have for you, Lenny, I was reading the article from WKBN about this, and you were quoted or they interviewed you for the article that appeared, but you talked about the current structure of funding for district schools and charter schools and how this creates a competition. And we've seen that here in Detroit. I live here in Detroit, lived here all my life. And we've seen that competition here in Detroit. We've seen about 100 Detroit public schools shut down over the past few years, past 10 years or something like that. How do you change that funding structure? Okay, what do you think the solution to all this is? And how do you change that funding structure and that competition over the funding?
Well, one of the things that we proposed in our legislative agenda at the beginning of the year at the coalition was to have the funding go straight from the state to the charter school. Because as long as the money goes to the student and the family. It's allocated per student. So the state says, okay, we're going to give, per student in this district is $10,000. The $10,000 for that student goes into the district. And if that kid's not at the district and is at a charter school, then the district gets to deduce up to 25 exemptions. The law in 97 was only 7. Now it's up to 25. 25 exceptions to keep the money so it doesn't follow the child over to the charter school. Well, if the district's still acting like a pass-through, they get the quote-unquote wrongly say it's their money. It's not their money. It's the students' money that's allocated by the state for their public education. If you skip the middleman and you let that money go straight to the charter school and you say, look, the kid's not in your district anyway, and by the way, the kid hasn't gone to your schools in 5 years. Why should you continue to see the money go through your district when this kid left the district in 2nd grade because they were not comfortable and the family wasn't comfortable in kindergarten and 1st grade? The kid's now in 7th grade. Why are you seeing this allotment of money every year? And by the way, we're counting on you to cut the check on time. We're seeing districts and charter schools fighting in Commonwealth Court, which again is taxpayer money being wasted because the charter school has to sue the school district under Commonwealth law to get their money, which comes delayed, which makes charter schools that are on the brink already that much more vulnerable economically. If you take the financial component out of it and then from there say, okay, district, okay, charter, the whole essence of this law was innovation to share amongst each other so that schools over here can catch kids up that are behind and districts over here can get to the work they're supposed to get to. Everybody can win. Look, there are going to still be some school districts that will fit kids, and it should. But there are some charter schools that will fit kids better, and they need to be available because not every kid in our community is going to be able to be eligible for a tax credit scholarship. They're not going to win that scholarship to that fancy prep school. The only way that every American is guaranteed school choice is with public charter schools within public education.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Lenny McAllister, I certainly appreciate it, man. Thank you so very much.
God bless you all. Thanks for having me, Roland.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends. Go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it, please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com.